I should have known something was off when Karen woke me up that morning with breakfast in bed. Not because it was unusual. Karen had always been the thoughtful type, but because it was our 10th anniversary. Karen was many things, but sentimental wasn't one of them. "Happy anniversary, babe," she said, flashing me that disarming smile that had won me over more than a decade ago. Her hazel eyes sparkled in the morning light, a picture of warmth and sincerity. "Thanks," I muttered, sitting up and grabbing the coffee she'd made. The smell was intoxicating, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I'd planned a surprise for later, a fancy dinner, flowers, the works. And yet, there was this gnawing feeling in my gut. A whisper I couldn't shake. Karen leaned over to kiss me on the cheek, her soft curls brushing against my face. "I've got a little something planned for us tonight," she said, her voice playful. "You'll love it." I smiled back, but her words felt hollow. Maybe it was just me overthinking. I'd been busy with work, and our marriage had lost some of its spark. This was her way of reigniting it, I told myself. The day was uneventful. I took a half day at work to prep for the evening, reservations at La Lumiere, a swanky French place Karen had been raving about for months. She didn't know I'd booked it, of course. Karen loved surprises. When I got home around 3, she wasn't there. No note. No text. Just an empty house and a void that felt bigger than it should have. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the living room, sharp and floral, as if she'd just left. I texted her. "Where are you?" "Got home early." No reply. I busied myself with errands, picking up the flowers, confirming the reservation, even stopping by her favorite bakery for dessert. By the time I got back, it was 6. Still no Karen. The house was eerily quiet. I headed upstairs to our bedroom to change, noticing the bed was perfectly made. Karen was meticulous, but this was next level. Pillows fluffed, blankets smoothed, not a wrinkle in sight. Something about it felt wrong. Then I noticed her phone on the nightstand. Karen never left her phone behind. I hesitated, the temptation gnawing at me. But I didn't touch it. Not yet. She'd probably explain everything when she got back. By 7, I was getting nervous. My calls went unanswered, my texts unread. Then came a message that made my stomach drop. "Hey man, you around tonight? Need to talk." It was from my brother Greg. Greg wasn't the kind of guy to need to talk. We were close, sure, but his texts were usually filled with crude jokes or fantasy football updates. For him to reach out like this felt off. I called him back. No answer. At 7:30, the front door opened. Karen walked in, flushed and radiant, carrying a shopping bag. "Hey," she said, a little breathless. "Sorry I'm late. Just got caught up with something." Something. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and accusatory. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated, setting the bag down on the counter. "I was picking up your gift," she said, flashing that same disarming smile. But it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh?" I said, crossing my arms. "Where's the gift?" Her face faltered for a split second, a crack in her perfect facade. "It's being delivered," she said quickly. "You'll see it tonight." I didn't push further. Not yet. But my mind was already spiraling. The hours leading up to dinner were a haze. Karen busied herself in the kitchen, humming softly as she arranged appetizers on a platter. I tried to focus on anything but her, sports highlights on the TV, a half-empty bottle of scotch on the counter. But I couldn't ignore the way she floated around the house, almost glowing with excitement. She seemed different. Her energy wasn't the soft, content kind I'd grown to know. It was frenetic, buzzing like she was trying to mask something underneath. When we sat down for dinner, her phone lit up on the counter. A message. The notification was too quick for me to read, but I caught the way her eyes darted toward it before she turned her focus back to me. "Something important?" I asked, keeping my voice casual as I sipped my wine. "No, just a group chat," she said, waving it off with a laugh. "You know how the girls get on our yoga threads. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but my gut tightened. The reservation at La Lumiere was supposed to be the highlight of our anniversary. A cozy table tucked in the corner, a candlelit atmosphere, it was perfect. Or at least, it should have been. Karen had dressed to kill. Her black dress clung to her curves, and her hair was styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. Every man in the restaurant probably envied me, and I wanted to feel that pride I used to when I looked at her. But instead, all I felt was unease. She reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "You've been so quiet all night. What's going on?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Nothing. Just work stuff, I guess." "You work too hard," she said, her voice soft. "We should take more time like this, just you and me." Her words sounded right, but they felt hollow. And then her phone buzzed again. She didn't reach for it this time, but I saw the flicker of tension in her jaw, the way her fingers clenched ever so slightly around her wine glass. "Who's blowing up your phone tonight?" I asked, keeping my tone light but pointed. "Oh, it's just the girls," she said quickly, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "They're probably just jealous I'm here with you and not out with them." I nodded, but something about her answer felt rehearsed. When we got home, I found myself standing in the kitchen alone while Karen excused herself to freshen up. Her phone was still sitting on the counter, the screen dark. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Was I really about to do this? Invade her privacy, betray the trust we'd built over 10 years of marriage? Yes. I reached for the phone, swiping up to unlock it, but of course, there was a passcode. Karen hadn't used a passcode before, not until recently. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She was hiding something. I set the phone back down just as I heard her footsteps coming down the hall. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice light as she leaned against the doorway, her makeup wiped clean and her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. "Yeah," I said, plastering on a smile. "Just grabbing some water." She smiled back and walked past me, and I caught the faintest whiff of her perfume, sharp and floral. It wasn't the one I'd bought her for Christmas. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Karen fell asleep almost instantly, her breathing slow and steady. I wanted to believe the doubts in my head were nothing more than paranoia, that the woman lying beside me was still the same Karen I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But something about her was different. And I was going to find out why. The morning after our anniversary dinner, Karen seemed off. She moved through the house with an unusual energy, her mood unusually bright, almost like she was overcompensating. "Coffee?" she asked, placing a mug in front of me at the dining table. I glanced up from my laptop, where I was sifting through work emails, and studied her. She wore a tank top and shorts, her hair thrown into a messy bun. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of domestic bliss. But I knew her too well. "Sure," I said, my tone neutral. She leaned over to kiss my cheek before heading toward the living room, where her phone rested on the couch. As she picked it up, I caught the faintest flicker of tension in her expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I've got a few errands to run," she said, slipping on her sneakers. "Need anything while I'm out?" "Nope," I replied, forcing a smile. She hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. "Okay. I won't be long." As the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I'd installed a tracking app on Karen's phone the night before. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Hell, I felt sick just thinking about it. But after Greg's warning and the strange shifts in her behavior, I needed answers. Pulling up the app on my laptop, I watched as the little blue dot, Karen, moved across the map. She wasn't headed to any of her usual haunts. No gym, no grocery store. Instead, the dot came to a stop at a residential address on the other side of town. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing, a friend's house, a surprise she was planning. But my gut told me otherwise. I opened another tab and ran a reverse address lookup. The property belonged to a man named Brian Carter. I didn't recognize the name, but I made a note of it anyway. Karen came home an hour later, her cheeks flushed from the cool air outside. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my voice casual as she set her purse on the counter. Yeah, she said with a smile. Just picked up a few things. Her smile was warm, but her eyes told a different story. I watched her closely for the rest of the day, every gesture, every word. She was friendly, affectionate even, but there was a distance to her that I couldn't ignore. That night, as she showered, I sat in the living room with her phone in my hands. The tracking app gave me her location, but I needed more. She changed her passcode recently, but after some trial and error, I guessed it, our wedding date. How poetic. Inside, her messages were clean, too clean. No incriminating texts, no suspicious notifications. But her gallery told a different story. There were photos from the past few months that I hadn't seen before, selfies of her in gym clothes, smiling coyly at the camera. In some, she wore the same outfit she'd had on during errands. One image, though, froze me in my tracks. It wasn't explicit, but the intent was clear. Karen, sitting on a couch I didn't recognize, her legs crossed, her expression playful. In the background, I saw a man's hand resting on the armrest beside her. The timestamp matched the location of Brian Carter's house. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me, followed by a surge of anger so intense it left my hands trembling. The next morning, I didn't confront Karen. Not yet. Instead, I reached out to Greg. Got a minute? I asked when he picked up. Yeah. What's up? I need you to look into someone for me, I said, keeping my voice steady. Brian Carter. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Who's that? Greg asked. Just someone Karen's been spending time with, I said, trying to keep the venom out of my voice. Greg sighed. You sure you want to go down this road? I don't have a choice, I said firmly. All right, he said. I'll see what I can dig up. That evening, I made a point to act normal, pretending nothing was wrong. Karen, oblivious to my growing suspicions, chatted about her day and even suggested we plan a weekend getaway. But I couldn't shake the image of her at Brian's house, the way she had smiled at the camera, her guard down in a way I hadn't seen in years. As we lay in bed that night, her head resting on my shoulder, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Karen thought she was clever, that she could hide her secrets behind smiles and deflections. But she didn't know I was already unraveling the truth. And when I had it all, when there was no denying what she'd done, I would make sure she felt every ounce of the betrayal she had inflicted on me. The next few days felt like a game of cat and mouse. Karen continued her routine of cheerful smiles and casual conversation, oblivious to the fact that I was peeling back the layers of her lies. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not without more evidence. Greg came through faster than I expected. Brian Carter, he said over the phone. 36, works as a personal trainer at one of those boutique gyms. He's divorced, no kids. Anything else? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Greg hesitated. He's known for getting close to his clients. Let's just say he doesn't mind crossing boundaries if it gets him what he wants. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. Karen had mentioned getting a personal trainer a few months ago, but she never told me his name. Thanks, Greg, I said, my voice tight. You sure you're okay? He asked. I'll be fine, I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. That evening, as Karen prepared dinner, I sat at the kitchen island, watching her every move. How was your day? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. Busy, I said. Yours? Oh, the usual, she replied, her voice light. Ran some errands, went to the gym. The gym. Of course. Who's your trainer again? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Her hand froze for a fraction of a second before she turned to face me, a smile plastered on her face. Brian. I've told you about him, haven't I? I nodded slowly. Maybe. Sounds familiar. She went back to chopping vegetables, her movements a little too deliberate. I could feel the tension crackling in the air. She knew I was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Later that night, I logged into the tracking app again. Sure enough, her location history confirmed several visits to Brian's house over the past month, each one under the guise of errands or gym sessions. I couldn't take it anymore. The next time she went to the gym, I was going to follow her. 2 days later, the opportunity presented itself. Karen kissed me goodbye, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile. "I might grab a smoothie with the girls afterward." "Sounds good," I said, forcing a smile. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and followed her at a safe distance. My heart pounded as I watched her car weave through traffic, heading toward the residential side of town. When she finally parked in front of Brian Carter's house, my stomach dropped. I pulled over a few houses down, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched her walk up the driveway. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She just opened the door and disappeared inside. For a few minutes, I sat there, debating what to do. My chest felt tight, my mind a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Finally, I grabbed my phone and stepped out of the car. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as I approached the house. Through the living room window, I could see Karen and Brian sitting on the couch, laughing. She was leaning into him, her hand resting on his thigh. I pulled out my phone and started recording, the shaky footage capturing every damning second. The final nail in the coffin came when she kissed him, her hands sliding up his chest as he pulled her closer. I stopped recording and stepped back, my hands trembling. I could have burst through the door right then, unleashed the fury boiling inside me. But I didn't. Not yet. No, Karen would get what was coming to her, but not until I had everything lined up. When Karen came home that night, she was all smiles. "How was your evening?" she asked, setting her gym bag down by the door. "Uneventful," I said, my voice calm. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips lingering a little longer than usual. "I miss you," she said softly. I forced a smile. "Miss you too." But as I lay in bed that night, my phone clutched in my hand, I replayed the video over and over, each second fueling the fire inside me. Karen thought she could play me, that her lies and smiles could keep me in the dark. But she didn't realize that the darkness was where I thrived. And now, it was her turn to feel the cold, brutal sting of betrayal. The next morning, Karen was her usual self. Cheerful, affectionate, and completely unaware that her entire facade was crumbling. It was almost amusing watching her flit around the house, humming a tune as if the world wasn't about to implode. I had to give her credit, she was good at playing the part. But now I knew the truth. And armed with that truth, I started building my plan. Step 1. Collect more evidence. The video was damning, yes, but I needed more proof, more leverage. Not because I doubted the power of what I'd already captured, but because I wanted to leave no room for her to spin the narrative. That night, as Karen slept soundly beside me, I reached for her phone again. The passcode was still our wedding date, a cruel irony I couldn't help but scoff at. Her messages were clean, too clean, just like before. But her photo gallery had new additions. I scrolled through the images, each one a dagger to the heart. Karen and Brian at his house. Karen smiling at the camera, her hand resting on his chest. A short video of her laughing as Brian whispered something in her ear, his hands firmly on her waist. It was sickening. But it wasn't enough. The following day, I called Greg. "Need your help again," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Name it," he replied without hesitation. "I want to know everything there is to know about Brian Carter. His work, his finances, his history, everything." "Got it," Greg said. "Give me a couple of days." I hung up, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't just want to catch Karen and Brian. I wanted to destroy them. 2 days later, Greg called me back. "All right, I've got something for you," he said. "Brian's got a bit of a reputation, as I mentioned before. Apparently, he's slept with at least 3 of his clients in the last year alone. One of them was married, and when her husband found out, it got messy. Lawsuits, restraining orders, you name it. Jesus, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. It gets worse, Greg continued. He's also been skimming money off his Jim's books. Not enough to get caught yet, but enough that if someone were to, let's say, tip off his boss, he'd be out of a job. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction settle over me. Good work, I said. Greg hesitated. What are you going to do with this? Don't worry about it, I said. Just know that it's in good hands. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Karen told me she had another gym session planned for the weekend. Brian says I've been making great progress, she said with a smile as she packed her bag. I'm sure you have, I replied, my voice steady. She didn't notice the edge in my tone, too busy making sure her outfit was perfect. As soon as she left, I grabbed my phone and called Greg. Meet me at Brian's place, I said. Now? Greg asked, surprised. No, I said firmly. Greg and I parked a few houses down, just like before. From our vantage point, we could see Karen's car in the driveway. You ready for this? Greg asked, glancing at me. More than ready, I said, gripping the handle of the door. We walked up to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't bother with stealth this time. I wanted them to know I was there. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, Greg close behind me. The sight that greeted us was worse than I expected. Karen and Brian were on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting on her thigh. For a moment, none of us moved. Karen's eyes widened in horror as she saw me, her face draining of color. Jason, she stammered, scrambling to her feet. This isn't what it looks like. Don't, I said, my voice sharp and cold. Don't you dare insult my intelligence. Brian stood, trying to look confident, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Hey man, let's talk about this. I cut him off with a glare. Sit down. He hesitated, then sank back onto the couch. I turned to Karen, my chest heaving with anger. How long? She didn't answer, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. How long? I demanded, my voice rising. A few months, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It didn't mean anything, Jason. I swear. Didn't mean anything? I snapped. You destroyed everything we built for this? I turned to Brian, who was sitting frozen on the couch. You think you can just screw someone else's wife and walk away unscathed? His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I pulled out my phone and played the video I'd recorded earlier, the damning footage filling the room with their betrayal. Karen collapsed into sobs, but I didn't care. You two deserve each other, I said coldly, shoving the phone back into my pocket. As I turned to leave, I looked at Greg. Let's go, Karen called after me, her voice broken and desperate. Jason, please. I can explain. But I didn't look back. I didn't go home after leaving Brian's house. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was about to collapse under the weight of everything I'd just seen, heard, and done. Greg drove us in silence, sensing that any words would just make things worse. You okay? He finally asked as he pulled into the parking lot of a nearby bar. No, I said bluntly, climbing out of the car. But I will be. The bar was quiet, dimly lit, and perfect for disappearing for a while. I ordered a whiskey neat and downed it in one go, the burn in my throat barely registering. Greg sat beside me, nursing his beer, his expression equal parts concerned and furious. What's the plan? He asked after a while. I stared at the empty glass in front of me. The plan. It had to be good. Something devastating. Something that wouldn't just teach Karen and Brian a lesson but would leave them questioning every choice they'd ever made. I need to talk to a lawyer, I said finally. Greg nodded. You want me to handle it? I know a guy. No, I said, signaling the bartender for another drink. This is something I need to do myself. The next morning, I was at the office of one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. I'd done my research the night before, poring over reviews and recommendations until I found someone who specialized in high-conflict cases. Her name was Amanda Rhodes, and she didn't mince words. "You've got a strong case," she said after I explained everything. "The video alone is enough to put you in a favorable position, especially if you want to pursue a no-contest divorce." "I don't just want a divorce," I said, my voice cold. "I want to make sure she walks away with nothing." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a prenuptial agreement?" "Yes," I said, pulling a copy out of my bag. "It's ironclad." She skimmed through it, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "This is excellent. If we play our cards right, she'll have no claim to your assets." "And what about him?" I asked, leaning forward. "Brian." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I want to ruin him," I said, my tone icy. Amanda hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "If he's been engaging in affairs with clients, that's a violation of most professional ethics codes. We can look into his employment history, see if there's anything we can use. It won't be easy, but it's possible." "Do it," I said without hesitation. Karen tried calling me dozens of times over the next few days. I ignored every single one. She left voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. "Jason, please, just let me explain. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I love you. I'll do anything to fix this. Please, just talk to me." Her words meant nothing to me now. Every time I replayed the video of her and Brian together, my resolve hardened. I didn't block her number, though. I wanted her to keep calling, to feel the sting of being ignored. A week later, I went home for the first time since walking out. Karen was there, sitting on the couch with tear-streaked cheeks and red-rimmed eyes. "Jason," she said, standing as soon as I walked through the door. I held up a hand. "Don't." She froze, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." I set my bag down and looked at her, my expression cold. "You should have thought about that before you crawled into bed with him." Her sobs grew louder, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Sympathy? No, it was disgust. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, my voice steady. "You'll be hearing from her soon." "Jason, please," she begged, dropping to her knees. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't do this." "There's no we anymore," I said. "You made sure of that." I walked past her, heading upstairs to pack some clothes. She followed me, still pleading. "What about everything we've built together?" she cried. "What about the last 10 years? I stopped and turned to face her. "What about it, Karen? Was it worth throwing all of that away for some sleazy trainer?" She flinched, her sobs quieting for a moment. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "It was a choice. And now you're going to live with the consequences." I moved into a hotel that night, refusing to spend another second under the same roof as her. The following day, Amanda sent her the divorce papers. When Greg called to ask how I was holding up, I told him the truth. "I'm not okay. But I will be." Because while Karen was busy drowning in guilt and desperation, I was laying the groundwork for the next phase of my plan, taking Brian Carter down, brick by brick. Karen's calls and messages had slowed to a trickle by the time the divorce papers were formally served. Whatever fight she had left in her had clearly been beaten down by the reality of her situation. I'd expected tears, anger, or some desperate attempt to salvage things, but there was silence. Good. I wasn't interested in her apologies or her tears anymore. I wanted results. Meanwhile, Brian Carter was still living his life as if nothing had happened. That smug bastard probably thought he'd dodged a bullet. But he had no idea I was just getting started. Greg came through again. "Brian's gym has a board of directors," he told me over the phone. "They've got strict policies about maintaining professional boundaries with clients. If we can prove he's violated that, then they'll have no choice but to fire him." I finished, a smile creeping across my face. Greg chuckled. Exactly. I also got a hold of his financials. Turns out, he's been dipping into the gym's petty cash fund, nothing big enough to flag, but enough to raise questions. Perfect, I said. Let's see how much he enjoys being unemployed. Step 1. Expose the affair to his workplace. I sent an anonymous email to the gym's board of directors, complete with the video footage of Karen and Brian together. I didn't include my name or any personal details, just the damning evidence and a brief note. This is what your star trainer has been up to with one of his married clients. Is this the kind of behavior your gym condones? The response was almost immediate. A representative from the board replied, thanking me for bringing the matter to their attention and promising a thorough investigation. It wasn't long before whispers began circulating about Brian's behavior. His colleagues started to pull away from him, and his regular clients began canceling sessions. By the end of the week, Brian was suspended pending further review. Step 2. Hit him where it hurts. Using the information Greg had gathered, I filed a report with the local authorities about the embezzlement. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get the ball rolling. Within days, Brian's accounts were flagged, and his gym launched an internal audit. It didn't take long for them to find discrepancies, and by the following week, Brian was officially terminated. Word spread quickly, and his reputation in the fitness community was left in tatters. No gym in town would touch him now. While Brian's life was unraveling, Karen was drowning under the weight of the divorce. Amanda had been ruthless, ensuring that every clause of our prenuptial agreement was enforced to the letter. Karen wasn't entitled to a single cent of my assets, and any attempt she made to negotiate was met with a swift denial. I'd also made sure to include a stipulation about the house. It was in my name, and once the divorce was finalized, she'd have 30 days to vacate. I didn't want anything tying me to her anymore. The day Karen called me, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Jason, she said, her voice trembling. Can we talk? There's nothing left to talk about, I said coldly. Please, she begged. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral place where I could walk away if things got heated. Karen looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She clutched her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Say what you need to say, I said, leaning back in my chair. She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I don't expect it. But I just wanted to tell you. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't say anything, letting the silence stretch between us. I messed up, she continued, her voice breaking. I let my insecurities, my selfishness, ruin the best thing I ever had. And now I'm paying for it. You're damn right you're paying for it, I said, my voice low and even. And you'll keep paying for it. Because I gave you everything, Karen. Everything. And you threw it all away for what? A cheap thrill with some loser trainer? She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know, she whispered. I know I don't deserve you. But I needed you to hear me say it. I'm sorry, Jason. I'll regret this for the rest of my life. I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover my coffee. You're right, Karen. You don't deserve me. And I hope you remember that every single day. With that, I walked out, leaving her sobbing at the table. Back home, I felt a strange sense of peace for the first time in weeks. The pieces were finally falling into place. Karen's life was in shambles. Brian was jobless and disgraced. And me? I was free. The divorce was finalized within weeks. Karen didn't fight it. She signed every document without so much as a whisper, her once fiery personality replaced by a shell of remorse and defeat. The house was legally mine, and she was ordered to vacate within 30 days. I didn't care where she went, only that she left. The day she moved out, I made a point not to be home. I didn't want to see her packing the life we'd built together into boxes, each item a reminder of the years I'd wasted with her. Instead, I drove to the cliffs just outside town, a place I used to go when I needed to think. The wind whipped through my hair as I stared out at the endless expanse of ocean, the waves crashing violently against the rocks below. I should have felt relief, satisfaction, victory. But all I felt was emptiness. Karen called me one last time a week later. "I just wanted to let you know I'm staying with my sister," she said, her voice quiet and subdued. "I'm getting help. Therapy." "Good," I said flatly. There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she'd hung up. "I don't expect you to believe me," she said finally, "but I never stopped loving you. Even when I was doing the things I did, I still loved you." I let out a bitter laugh. "You've got a funny way of showing it, Karen." "I know," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I hope, someday, you find happiness again. Real happiness." "Goodbye, Karen," I said, ending the call before she could say anything else. Meanwhile, Brian's life continued to crumble. The gym fired him after their investigation revealed a pattern of misconduct with clients. His name was dragged through the mud in the local fitness community, and word spread quickly that he wasn't just a sleazy trainer but a thief as well. Greg kept me updated, reveling in the details of Brian's downfall. "He's been blacklisted from every decent gym in the area," Greg told me over a beer. "Last I heard, he's working odd jobs to make ends meet. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, huh?" I raised my glass in a mock toast. To karma. With the divorce behind me and Karen out of my life, I threw myself into work. My business became my refuge, a place where I could focus on something other than the gaping hole in my chest. But no matter how much success I achieved, no matter how many hours I poured into my projects, the emptiness lingered. Friends encouraged me to start dating again, to get back out there. But the idea of letting someone else into my life, of opening myself up to the possibility of betrayal again, was unbearable. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I found myself going through the boxes Karen had left behind. They were tucked away in the attic, forgotten in the chaos of everything else. Most of it was junk, old clothes, trinkets, photos I couldn't bear to look at. But at the bottom of one box, I found a handwritten note. It was dated the day before the divorce was finalized. "Jason, I know this won't change anything, but I needed to put this into words. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. What I did to you wasn't about you, it was about me. My insecurities, my selfishness, my weaknesses. You deserve better, and I'll regret every day that I couldn't be that for you. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. You deserve peace, Jason. You deserve happiness. I'll always love you. Karen." I stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring together as my vision clouded. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry. Not for Karen. Not for what we'd lost. I cried for the man I used to be, the man who believed in love, in trust, in forever. And when the tears stopped, I took a deep breath and burned the letter, watching the flames consume the last remnants of a life I no longer recognized. But endings, I realized, are also beginnings. Karen's betrayal had destroyed me, yes. But it had also freed me. For the first time in years, I wasn't tethered to anyone else's expectations or failures. My life was mine to rebuild brick by brick. And rebuild it I would. The months after Karen's betrayal and the divorce felt like walking through the rubble of a bombed-out city. Everywhere I looked, there were fragments of the life I'd built, shattered beyond recognition. But amidst the wreckage, I began to rebuild. At first, it was the small things, organizing the house to reflect my own preferences, redecorating the living room without Karen's input lingering in my mind. I got rid of anything that reminded me of her, the framed photos, the gifts we'd exchanged over the years, the scented candles she used to insist on buying. I wanted no ghosts haunting me. And then, piece by piece, I began to reclaim my identity. The business thrived like never before. Throwing myself into work had been a way to distract myself at first, but it quickly turned into something more. I began taking risks I'd avoided in the past, expanding into new markets, chasing bigger contracts. Without Karen's doubts holding me back, I found a confidence I hadn't realized I was missing. One night, I sat in my office after hours, staring at the contract for a major deal that would cement my company as a regional powerhouse. Signing it felt like a turning point, not just professionally, but personally. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was rebuilding. I felt like I was building something new, something entirely my own. Karen reached out a few more times, but I never responded. She left voicemails, some apologetic, others wistful. I didn't listen to most of them, deleting them as soon as they came through. But one, a few months after the divorce, caught me off guard. "Hi, Jason. I don't know why I'm calling. I guess I just wanted to hear your voice. I hope you're doing okay. I know I hurt you, and I'll never stop regretting that. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You were always so much stronger than me. I hope you know that." I deleted it, of course. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I felt nothing. Brian, on the other hand, hadn't fared as well. Greg, ever the investigator, kept me updated on his downward spiral. He'd been blacklisted from the fitness community, unable to find work at any reputable gym. Rumor had it he was working construction now, scraping by with whatever odd jobs he could find. "Serves him right," Greg said with a grin over drinks one night. I nodded, though I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Brian wasn't worth any more of my energy. His life was in shambles, and that was enough for me. It wasn't until nearly a year after the divorce that I started thinking about dating again. At first, the idea felt absurd. How could I ever trust someone after what Karen had done? How could I open myself up to the possibility of betrayal again? But as the months passed, I realized that Karen's actions didn't define me. They were her failure, not mine. One night, on a whim, I downloaded a dating app. The first few conversations were awkward, stilted. I wasn't used to putting myself out there again, and the idea of building a new connection from scratch was daunting. But then I matched with someone who caught my attention, Claire. Her profile was unassuming, just a picture of her hiking in the mountains, a bright smile on her face, and a simple bio. "Lover of books, dogs, and bad puns. Looking for someone to laugh with." It was her first message that got me. "You look like someone who knows the secret to great coffee. Care to share?" For the first time in a long time, I laughed. Claire and I met for coffee a week later. She was nothing like Karen, no sharp edges, no carefully calculated charm. She was warm, genuine, and easy to talk to. We spent hours at that little cafe, talking about everything from favorite books to embarrassing childhood stories. By the time we said goodbye, I realized I hadn't thought about Karen once. Claire wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost. She was something entirely new, a reminder that life didn't end with betrayal. It began again. Karen's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it hadn't destroyed me. If anything, it had shown me just how resilient I could be. It had forced me to confront my fears, to reevaluate my priorities, and to rediscover the strength I'd always had. As I stood on my balcony one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This was my life now. And for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine. A year and a half had passed since the day my world crumbled. What had started as rage, despair, and the overwhelming need for revenge had slowly transformed into something else, acceptance. Life had moved on, and so had I. Karen was now a distant memory, a faded chapter in the story of my life. Every now and then, her name came up, through mutual acquaintances, idle gossip, or the occasional whisper of her struggles. I didn't pry. I didn't care. It was Claire who helped me see that there was more to life than clinging to the pain of the past. Claire and I were sitting on my balcony one quiet evening, a bottle of wine between us. The soft hum of the city below provided a soothing backdrop as we talked about everything and nothing. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked suddenly, her voice gentle. I knew who she meant. Karen. "Not often," I admitted, swirling my wine. "But when I do, it's not the way it used to be. I don't feel the anger anymore." Claire nodded, her hand finding mine. "That's good. It means you've healed." I looked at her, at the woman who had brought light back into my life after so much darkness. "I think I have," I said. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made everything else fade away. Closure came unexpectedly, in the form of a letter. I found it in my mailbox one afternoon, addressed in Karen's handwriting. For a moment, I debated throwing it away without opening it. But curiosity won out, and I unfolded the paper with steady hands. "Jason, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I needed to write it. Not for you, but for me. To say the things I never had the courage to say before. You were a better husband than I ever deserved. You gave me everything, your love, your trust, your loyalty, and I threw it all away. I don't expect you to forgive me, and honestly, I'm not sure I'd forgive myself if I were in your shoes. But I wanted you to know that I've changed. Therapy has helped me see the person I became, and I hate her. I've been working hard to be better, to make amends where I can. But the one person I can never make amends with is you. You deserve so much more than I gave you. I hope you found it. I hope you're happy, truly happy, in a way I could never give you. If nothing else, I'll carry the lessons I've learned from losing you for the rest of my life. Thank you for everything you gave me, Jason. I'll always regret letting it slip through my fingers. Karen." I folded the letter and set it aside, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a quiet sense of finality. She was right about one thing: I had found happiness. Real happiness. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where Karen had once stood during our wedding vows. But this time, it wasn't Karen walking toward me down the aisle, it was Claire. She was radiant, her smile brighter than the sun. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unfiltered joy. When she reached me, she took my hands in hers, her touch grounding me in the moment. "You're my second chance at life," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "And you're mine," she replied, her eyes glistening. As we exchanged vows, I felt the last remnants of the past fall away, replaced by something stronger. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new book entirely. Karen's betrayal had once felt like the end of everything. But standing there with Claire, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I realized it had been a beginning. A painful one, yes, but a necessary one. Sometimes life has to burn to the ground before you can rebuild it stronger. And as Claire and I walked hand in hand into our future, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living.